real strong with our club is make sure all of our members, and I've been keeping bees for about 38 years, and I have a mentor too, so it's all good for us to have a mentor. So we'll be glad to get you a mentor to help you with any bee questions you might have. Any other new ones? All right, good. Tonight we're going to have a class on summer management from Brutz English. We've known Brutz for quite a long time. We see a lot of GBA meetings, but I'm not going to tell you all the good things he's has done, but I'm going to let Terry take care of that, and then we'll let Brutz step up.
This is stolen from UGA, not my work. Brutz started beekeeping in 2009.
It's not turned on. Turn it on.
She's loud enough without it.
See? He's the owner of Liberty Hill Honey Company down Barnesville. He is also a honey show master beekeeper. He's senior honey show judge. You are the state coordinator honey show dude. National. Sorry, national. So he's all things honey show, all things honey. And he's the current president of the American Honey Show Training Council. And he also runs a bunch of hives. And so this is going to be how to get your bees through the summer so you're set up to get them ready for the fall on tonight. So Brutz, we're glad to see you here. Sorry about the traffic.
Is this thing on?
It is not on.
But it's on, just we need to, let's turn it on, yeah.
Switch, huh?
Yeah.
Right at the top.
At the top. All right, I'm not very smart. There we
Yeah,
go.
I'm good at pushing buttons.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. That picked up real good, didn't it? Well, thank you for the introduction, Butch and Terry. As I said, I've been keeping bees for about 15 years now, with varying degrees of success. I've had as many as 50 colonies and as few as one. And it goes with the season sometimes. But we're going to talk about summer management tonight. Georgia is a real peculiar place to keep bees, particularly part of Georgia that you're in. You're kind of on the line between the mountains and the Piedmont. And we have very unique geography and weather here. But with that, I'm going to move right into the talk. So you need to do some planning ahead. There are a lot of things you can do during the summer, but you got to think about all these things a little bit in advance because you don't want to step off without a plan in place. Usually the summer is the time when people are robbing their bees. We have a pretty good spring nectar flow here. It dries up generally around the 1st of June, the end of May, and most people do a lot of their robbing in June or early July. Now, if you're rolling up into the mountains a little bit more, or you're going to go after sourwood, you might have a second flow, or you might wait a little while. But thinking about your robbing and extracting for the year is something that typically goes on in the summer. I think the most important thing you need to be thinking about in the summer is surviving the dearth. We think about beekeeping and honeybees. We read all these books about winter, and bees evolved to produce honey so they can survive the period of the year where there are no flowers. So they store nectar as honey so they have a food source because of the winter dearth. We don't really have a winter dearth in Georgia. We have a summer dearth. Now you may think, now there's flowers and all kinds of stuff out here blooming. If it's not raining, and I know we've had a lot of rain in the last 2 weeks, but if it's not raining, you could have a gazillion million flowers out there, but they're not going to have a drop of nectar in them. And typically in Georgia, during the summer, we get long patches of no rain, and if there's no rain, there is no nectar, and we have a huge, huge dearth typically every summer, generally in 1 or 2 long stretches. Summer's a good time to do some of your pest treatments. Like I say, you've done your robbing and extracting. You've got the supers off. It's a good time to do some splits or do some mite treatments. Summer splits is a good time to make your increase. If you want to divide your colonies, increase your colonies, summer's a great time to do that. The last thing on my to-do list of planning for the summer is thinking about heat safety. If y'all haven't noticed, it gets a little toasty outside during this time of the year. If you're not careful and you're not mindful, you can get yourself in a bad situation quick, fast, and in a hurry. But those are some of the things we're thinking about. So get into your hives. I just closed the cord on I'm doing my cord there. Good beekeeping always starts with hive inspections. If you're not in those hives, you don't know what's going on. You can guess, you can think, you can look at the front of those hives, pay attention to what your bees are doing. But until you crack that sucker open and start pulling out frames, you can't be 100% sure. You've got to get into your hives. And I think during this time of year, at least, even if you got your supers off and you're done with honey, you need to be looking at those hives every 10 to 14 days, because it does not take long for them to run out of food and get into a bad situation. So keep doing your hive inspections. Begin with your hive inspections. You'll want to start on the outside of the hive. Pay attention to the weather. Some of this stuff is very fundamental, but it doesn't change, and it absolutely bears repeating. What's the weather been like? Now, I talked about the heat and how the lack of rain creates a dearth of nectar. And you think, well, we just had a bunch of rain. Well, that can be just as bad as not enough rain, because heavy rain like we just had washes the nectar out of the flowers. And then if we don't get any more rain for another week or two, it's just compounding. But you have to pay attention to the weather, both precipitation and heat. Pay attention to how dry it is outside. Go kick up some dust, pick up something in your yard, stick your hand in the flower bed and see if what the moisture's like out there. You have to pay attention to how much moisture is available in the environment. Like I said, if it's not there for the flowers to consume, they're not going to produce nectar. Pay attention to what's still blooming. There are a lot of things that are in bloom this time of year that are great for bees. We don't have a lot of monofloral honey in Georgia. If you're up in the mountains above 2,000 feet, then you can get some sourwood. If you're down in the swamps along the Florida border, you can get some tupelo. You can also get some gallberry down here if you're in South Georgia. If you happen to be close to somebody who does a lot of cotton or a lot of blueberries, you can sometimes get that, but it is very rare. Probably 90% or better of what we produce in Georgia is wildflower honey, and that is just an amalgamation of the different things you see blooming out there. Mimosas blooming right now, crepe myrtle's blooming right now, roses are blooming right now. Most of the fruit-bearing things have come and gone, but paying attention to what's in bloom is super important. When I started beekeeping, I kept a journal in my car. I'd just write down as I was riding down the road, and I'm like, hey, that's blooming today, and it wasn't blooming yesterday. And I'd write the date and what it was, and then when it stopped blooming, just building a little database in my head of what's coming along in what order. So still from the outside, what are your bees foraging? As I said earlier, my 15 years have never seen my bees have a period of time in the summer, winter, fall, or anything else where they weren't bringing in pollen. They're always got little pollen balls on their legs, even in December and January. It just never seems to stop. The further south you get, the more of that you get. But they are they're also foraging for nectar and other things. And if they can't find nectar, they're going to look for anything sugary and sweet. But what are your bees foraging? You're going to know a lot about that by paying attention to the weather and the environment. What's in bloom? What's the rain been like? What's the heat been like? How are they acting? Anybody ever dealt with a hot hive? I mean, anybody who's been doing this for any length of time has dealt with that. For those of you who just raised your hand, what month of the year are the hives the hottest in your experience?
August.
June, July, August, September.
I agree with August. I don't even mess with my bees in August. I just put feeders out and forget about it. Bees, if they don't have anything to eat and they are hot and dry, they get pissy. Get my own language out of the way. But if your bees are acting real testy, there's a good chance there's nothing out there for them to eat, and they're anxious about it, and it affects how they act and interact with you. How does the hive look from the outside? That's more of a, is everything right with the health of your hive? If you walk to your hive and it looks like you have little streaks of watery peanut butter on there, you might have a nosema problem. Or you might have some other bacterial problem. If you've got dead bees laying out in front of your hive in more numbers than usual, you might have some kind of any number of kill-off problems if you've got little chalk-shaped pellets in front of your hive. You might have a brood disease problem like chalk brood. You can tell a lot just by looking from the outside, but there is no substitute for cracking those hives open. So getting inside the hive, check the weight of your hive. Everybody knows how to walk up behind a hive and just pick up the back end of it. If it comes up like a feather, then you've got a problem. You need to start feeding those bees. If it feels like it's a ton of bricks, then you're in good shape. But you want to check the weight of your hives regularly. How are the bees responding once you do that? Sometimes when those bees get hot, you don't even have to get near the hive. You can get 20 feet away and you're going to get that tap, tap, tap on your veil. They're letting you know, this is not the day, buddy. This is not the day. And it can be too hot, or it can be, I would say a day like today would be a horrible day to mess with bees. The barometric pressure and the humidity in the air, they don't like that either. But how are the bees responding as you approach the hive and start to interact with it? Once you get inside the hive, you get that lid off, or they boiling up, you have a ton of bees coming to the surface of this hive. Does the population look like it is full and robust? And they're gonna come up like a one of those great YouTube videos of the sewer drains backing up. That's how you want to see them boiling out of your hives. While you're checking your hives, aside from your population, you want to check the food stores. As you're pulling those frames out, hopefully you have nice heavy frames that have a lot of honey and a lot of pollen in them, or a lot of brood. But you need to be conscientious and conscious of how much of what's in that hive as you go through it. You got to check those food stores, and if they're looking light, you got to feed your bees. You want to check your brood pattern like with any other hive inspection. Make sure your queen right. If you can find your queen, great. If you can't find your queen, if you have evidence that the queen's in there, can you find eggs? Can you find larvae? Can you find cat brood? If you can find eggs, then you know you've had a queen in there at least for the last 2 or 3 days. Now is the time to look for problems during those hive inspections. Don't wait for something to get sideways. So robbing and extracting. Thank you. I love that slide. It's one of my favorite slides in all my talks. I love it when people get my humor. So robbing and extracting, a lot of people do that during this time of year. You got to ask yourself some questions. Are we at the end of the nectar flow? Have we gotten all that we can get? How are you going to go about robbing your hives? What process are you going to use? Then extracting and processing your hives. Where are you going to do this? How are you going to do this? You got to get a plan. And when you are robbing, you want to make sure you leave enough for your bees. If you don't, then you need to have a plan in place to feed those bees, because they will starve during the summer just as quickly as they will during the winter. And you're going to hear me pound that drum all through this talk. So, surviving the dearth. This is the Georgia I grew up in. It was dry, dry, dry. It stays dry. We're famous for our peaches. We're famous for our braves. We're also famous for our hot weather. I had to sit at the Atlanta Motor Speedway for the last 3 days, guarding the gate for my lodge, or we do a fundraiser there. And people called me all day long, asked me what I was doing, and I said, I'm sitting out here roasting like a pig on a spit, and all you need to do is stick an apple in my mouth, and we'd be there. It gets hot here, dangerously hot, and sometimes we think because we're Georgians, we're used to it, we're familiar with it, we can just handle it. But every human body has limitations. When it comes to having your bees survive the dearth, you don't want to overharvest. You want to monitor the weather. I think one of my slides got out of order, y'all. And when in doubt, feed your bees. Let's say that together. When in doubt, feed your bees. Let's do that a little louder. When in doubt, feed your bees. That's right. If you open a hive, you pull out a frame, and you see that, you murdered your bees. All right? Beekeeping is just like anything else. It is a creature, an organism, and I'm not being real religious about this, but if you believe in God and you believe in exercising dominion and control over the creatures of the earth, I submit to you, you don't have any less of an ethical or moral duty to your bees than you do your cat, your dog, your goat, your chickens, your cows, or anything else that you keep. And if you don't feed them, this is what it looks like. If you open a hive up and pull out a frame and you got a bunch of bee booties sticking out at you, they starve to death. That is the telltale sign of bee starvation. And the number one reason bees starve in this country is bad beekeeping. Bad beekeeping. You have got to take care of your bees and provide for them if they can't get the resources they need naturally. So, I just said this. Starvation is the number one killer of honeybees in the U.S. Not colony collapse, not varroa mites, not anything else. More bee colonies die from starvation than anything else. So when in doubt, eat your bees. There we go. I like this. All right. Another thing you can do during the summer is start treating for pests. These are, I think, the two big ones here, the varroa mites and the small hive beetles. Anybody had small hive beetles before? Don't you love them? God, they're the bane of my existence. Varroa mites, I think, are the biggest universal problem for honeybees in this country. They vector every other kind of problem, and if you're not treating for mites, your bees are going to be dead in 2 years. And you can talk about all of this natural beekeeping and let nature take its course stuff, but the science just doesn't back that up. You've got to treat for varroa mites or your colonies are going to die. It's just something you've got to get out there and do. And summertime's a good time to do it. Most of the treatments for varroa mites now want you to have supers pulled off, not have honey on there, or they want you to have breaks and brood patterns, and the summer's a great, great time to do that. And there are lots of different ways to skin that cat. That's its own 2-hour talk. But this is a good time of year to deal with those. It's always a good time to kill the small hive beetle, in my opinion. So small hive beetles, these little black ladybug-looking monsters. If you open a hive and you see 2 or 3 of them, you're probably okay. If you open a hive and you see 50 of them scattered out, you've got a problem. This is the end result of small hive beetles in your hive. They will go through, they're not trying to eat the honey, they're not trying to eat the pollen, they are eating the cocoons. When your bees pupate in those honeys, in those cells, and they come out and they leave those cocoons in there, that's what these small hive beetles are trying to get, is the residual protein and minerals and that, and they just bore right through the cells to do that, and it'll leave a nasty, slimy, disgusting mess in your hives, and it will eventually cause your bees to abscond. There are several different ways to deal with small hive beetles out there. Is there anybody from the university here? All right. Y'all promise not to tell on me? I got told on one time. I got a call from Delaplane getting on to me. There's a product called Taurus. The active ingredient in it is called fipronil. It is the same thing they put on dogs and cats in their shoulder blades to get rid of the fleas, the ticks, and the bugs. You can buy it in a 16-ounce bottle for about $50 or $60, but that'll treat 2 acres. And you do put that in a ground trench and pour it under your beehives. It does wonderful, terrible things to hive beetles. But you don't want to get it on your bees, and you don't want to put it apply it in a way that it's going to get in your hives, because it will also do terrible things to honeybees. Now, that's just because I have this sadistic thing about small hive beetles. It works really good. It is not labeled for that. If you say, Brutz English stood there and said, use that, I will deny it. Well, find the guy with the tape. Now, if you want to do something less abusive or intrusive about hive beetles, they don't like the sun. If you put your hives out in open sun, direct sunlight, that will deter hive beetles considerably. If you understand the life cycle of hive beetles, and how they come out, the larvae crawl through your beehive making that nest, but then the larvae crawl out of the beehive and they pupate in the dirt, the ground underneath the hives. That's why the ground drench works so good. But while they're down there, there are other things that can get them too. Diatomaceous earth, nematodes, there are all kinds of things you can use. If you put them on a hard surface where they can't dig into the ground, I have found I have far less hive beetles when I put bees on red packed clay than when I put it on soft, loamy, black dirt. Because they can't dig into the packed clay, the sun-baked clay nearly as well. Now, saying that, they apparently have done some studies. Jennifer Berry of the Bee Lab tells me that they have documented hive beetle larvae crawling as many as 20 feet over concrete to get to dirt. But if you got some chickens, that helps with that.
Your
Oh.
mic is off.
I'm sorry?
Your
Can you
mic.
Did I turn it off? Let's see. It might have just died. Can you hear me still? Anybody having problems hearing me?
You're
Yeah,
back on.
we
It's on.
Now we're back on? All right. Victory. All right, there are other things. You can use hive beetle traps. They have a variety of models of hive beetle trap. I think this thing is just going on and on, Phil. I don't know why. But rather than worry about it, I'm just gonna yell at you. They have hive beetle traps that go underneath the hives. They have hive beetle traps that go in between the frames and the hives. They have hive beetle traps that go on top of the bars, your top bars underneath your lids. There are all manner of small hive beetle traps that use different baits to get the beetles in, trap them, and or kill them. That first one was underneath your hive trap. This is one that sticks between frames. There's another one that sits between frames. There are lots of cool options for beetle traps, and they all work good. The real problem with them is that it doesn't ever get them all. It's a constant, ongoing battle. That's another one. Guard Star is another product that they used to use for ground drenches under beehives. I don't think they make Guard Star anymore, but that Taurus works the same way.
How would you spell Taurus?
T-A-R-U-S, like the zodiac sign.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sure they have it under some other trade name too, but that's the one that I see most commonly. All right. Again, like I said, it's direct sunlight, hard packed soils, uses of nematodes, diatomaceous earth, other things. I get ahead of my slides sometimes. All right, varroa mites. Now, one of my friends pointed out earlier that I've been a little salty at the bee conventions lately because I've been going to these breakout sessions for 15 years now, and there's only one breakout session I want to go to, and they never have it. I want to go to the breakout session that says, we found a way to kill varroa mites dead, not kill your bees. When they have that one, I'll be in the crowd. But varroa mites are horrible. For those of you who are not familiar with varroa mites, they are in the same family as ticks and spiders. They're technically arachnids. There's a nice blow up of one. To give you some perspective about varroa mite on a bee, if you had a tick on you that was the size of your fist, that's about the size ratio. Now, what would that do to your just day-to-day system? How would how do you think you'd feel walking around with that sucking the fluids out of you? Now, what if you had 3 or 4 of them? And that's what varroa mites do to the bees. They don't kill the bees. They don't suck the blood out of them. They actually suck the fatty tissues out of them. But they tear their systems down so that every little bug and nasty that comes along can wipe out your hive. They, as they say, vector other problems. You can use screen bottom boards as a part of IPM. If you don't want to use any kind of chemicals, you can use drone culling. You can use all kinds of additives in your hives. There's formic acid, there's thymol, there's hot guard. Am I missing any of the natural ones? I know I got some other master beekeepers in here. I'm not the only one. And then you can move into your more nuclear options with your hard chemicals, Apistan, and some other ones. But most beekeepers don't want to use that kind of stuff. They want to follow a process called IPM. Has everybody heard of Integrated Pest Management, IPM? It's where you got a problem and you try to adjust the solution based on the severity of the problem. If you just got a few hive beetles, you might try smashing hive beetles with your finger. If you got a bunch of hive beetles, you might try moving your hives in the direct sunlight. If you were feeling overrun with hive beetles, you go find the Taurus and do the ground drench. But you kind of scale the solution in proportion to the problem. And they talk about that a lot in all different kinds of beekeeping applications. But the varroa mites are kind of the exception. They really, I think the recommendation on the Bee Lab now is just treat twice a year at least and roll with it. Don't worry about the integrated pest management. grease patties, all kinds of different stuff. Again, that's a 2-hour talk. Oxalic acid, which is basically wood bleach, is another very common one. They can use it as a dribble or a vaporize it. But all of these things have their pros and have their cons. Some of them you can use whenever, whether you got honey on there or supers on there or not. And some of them have to be temperature regulated. You can't use them when it's too hot or too cold. You have to leave them on or get them off a certain amount of times. It's very important to follow the labels, except for the Taurus. There's an example of an oxalic acid vaporizer. That's a kind of an older model, but you're basically fumigating your hive. All right, summer splits. Summer's a great time to make splits. You got your supers off. You're worried about your pest management as well. Breaking that brood cycle up by making splits is a great, great time to do it. But it takes a little bit of babying. You've got to make sure when you make those splits that you have the resources available for those bees to keep them alive. But a lot of people make a lot of splits during the summer. I have myself gone from 6 to 36 hives in the space of a summer just making summer splits. I know people who have done many times that. It's just how crazy and far down the rabbit hole do you want to go. But remember, at some point, beekeeping quits being a hobby and it becomes work. It can get very, very laborious if you find yourself with too many hives too quick. I always encourage people, grow slowly. All right, so if you're gonna make splits, you wanna see loads and loads of worker bees. You wanna make sure there are plenty of drones, particularly if you're doing walk-away splits. There are different ways to do splits. You can buy queens and pull resources and add new queens to it. You can do what we call a walk-away split, where we're pulling frames of eggs and larvae out, making splits out of that and let them raise their own queens. You gotta make sure you got lots and lots of drones handy if you're doing that. You can buy queen cells, or you can buy virgin queens. Again, you gotta have lots of drones to make that work. Well-bred queens are very much available during the summer, but you wanna make sure you're getting well-bred queens. You're all lucky you're in Georgia, which is kind of honeybee haven as far as producing honeybees. South Georgia is one of the largest commercial producers of honeybees in the world. Pretty much everybody on the eastern side of the United States and Canada gets their honeybees from Georgia. And anybody who tells you different is lying to you. What they're doing is they're rebuying bees from South Georgia and they're trucking them north and then reselling them. And there are even beekeepers in Georgia that do that. They go right down to Baxley or Jessup. They buy 200 packages and for $75 a package, and they roll back up here and sell them for $95 or $110 a package, and like they're their own bees, but they're not. They came out of South Georgia. There are a few people who raise them, but not a great many. All right, we'll talk about my least favorite thing about the summer in Georgia. It gets hot, and the last few days has been demonstrative of that. It has been crazy. You have got to be mindful of the heat in Georgia for a variety of reasons, not just how it affects your bees, but how it can affect you too. Heat safety is a big, big deal. This is from a screenshot from last year. It's actually hotter the last few days than even this is. When it gets into those 90s, especially in those 90s, but it doesn't have to be that hot. When it gets to those 90s and those triple digits, and you're out there in a bee suit, even if it's just a jacket and a veil, even if you're out there in just a veil and shorts and t-shirt, which is how I often work bees, you can get in a heat crisis fast. You have to be very, very self-aware of what's going on. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke are real problems in Georgia, and you don't want to have to get yourself out of a pickle. It will kill you. It will kill you. And who's going to be out there to pick you up off the ground and drag you off? Most of us beekeep by ourselves. If you're going to be in the bee yard for any length of time, you need to have a plan, and you need to let somebody know where you are and when you expect to be back. So watch the weather. If you're going to work your bees, do it in the morning, do it in the afternoon, before or after it gets real hot. Stay out of the heat of the day. From 11 to 3, there's no excuse to be in a bee yard in June, July, and August in Georgia. Watch the temperature. If it's in the mid-90s, go put some sugar water feeders out, and go back in the house. Don't get out there and try to kill yourself doing something to those bees in that kind of weather. Now, this is a unique crowd. There are a lot of young beekeepers out here, but most of you are old farts like me. We're past the top of the mountain, and things don't work like they worked when we were in our 20s and 30s. And those hot temperatures get to us more. Again, working in the cooler parts of the day, if you can put your bees in the shade, sometimes it's worth tolerating some of those high beetles or find some other way to do it. But if you can get your bees situated where you're working in the shade, all the better. Know thyself. Know your personal limitations. Brutzy gets angry and clumsy, and he rushes when he gets hot. He's not a safe worker in the heat. He also doesn't do well on uneven terrain when he gets hot. I realize these things about myself, and I set my bees up in places where I don't have to contend with those problems. Be aware of your own personal condition and situation. I realize that I am a 400-pound plus man, and I get hot, and I need a lot to drink to stay cool. And even if I have an unlimited supply of water, I'm going to get hot. And I realize I'm messing with my blood pressure, which makes my cardiologist unhappy. You have to be aware of your limitations. I also take a medication that makes my skin particularly sensitive to sunlight. You got to be aware of these things. They add up, and those little things can stack up quick and create a problem for you. Always stay hydrated when you're going out in the bee yard. Take some bottled water with you. All right. Thinking about to the end of it. One more time. If in doubt,
Feed your bees.
all right. Plan ahead. Get prepared. Have a plan. Think about what you want to do, when you want to do it, and plan it out. Keep an eye on the weather. Stay on top of your hive inspections. When you go to rob your bees, rob responsibly. Leave something for the bees, or have a plan to provide for them otherwise. If in doubt,
Feed your bees.
tell you, more bees die from starvation than anything else. Treat for pests. This is a good time of year to deal with that. Make some splits if you want to add some hives to your apiary, and mind that Georgia heat. Does anybody have any questions? Top 40 minutes is what they told me to roll. I love questions. I have 3 daughters. One of them's 11. I answer questions constantly. Yes, sir.
When you say rob responsibly, can you give any more guidance on that for those of us that aren't too familiar with how much to rob?
It is very difficult to gauge because everybody's geography, their environment is a little different. They say your bees, if you read the books now, which the bees, you know, the bees read the books, 40 pounds of honey to get through the winter is what they typically say in the books. Now, all those books were written by people in Ohio and Pennsylvania that don't have to deal with Georgia weather. I think you need to leave at least a medium super of honey, worth of honey, which is about 40 pounds on your hives at any time. If you've got less than that, throw a feeder out. Provide them something to eat. Because something happens to you, you have an emergency, you get hurt. Who knows what the world's going to do on any given day. If you can't get back to those hives for 2 or 3 weeks, there's a good chance that they can make it a couple weeks on that. Now, I had a hive, the hive that taught me that lesson about 12 years ago. I had this gorgeous double deep, had 5 medium supers just loaded to the gills, is all I could do to move the supers on and off the hive. It's like, I'm gonna wait. It wasn't a good time in the end of May for me to go do this. I said, I'm gonna come back in the middle of June, pull these things off and rob them. And it got hot, and it quit raining. And I didn't think about it, I didn't know, I didn't understand at that point in my beekeeping career. And I got all my stuff together and went out there to rob that hive. I had my fume boards together and my little trolley with my carts and my wet towels, and everything was just right. And I popped the lid off that thing and got the inner cover off and got my hive tool between the top 2 boxes, and I went poof, and that thing went and bone dry empty. I was like, well, that sucks. So I went to the next one. Poof, 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 poof. They emptied those 5 supers of honey. Nothing. Absolutely nothing in the space of about 2.5 weeks. And that's 200 pounds of honey that one hive ate in less than 3 weeks. So I realized that a robust colony of bees can go through that food fast. There's 80 to 100,000, 120,000 mouths to feed in there. And it's little bits at a time, but those accumulate. So I would say try to leave at least 40 pounds on any given time, whether you do it in one super or whether you do it in a few deep frames left on the sides, however works for you. Any other questions? Yes, sir?
Is it possible to start a hive around this time of year?
It is possible. You can make splits. You can still buy nukes and whole colonies from people. You're not going to find a lot of swarms now. And you can find package bees. But if you do try to start a colony this time of year, you're going to have to feed, because they're not, unless there's a big nectar flow on, they're not going to draw a lot of honeycomb. So you have to just be mindful that you're going to have to put that to them. Now, if you want a side workaround for the lack of comb, there's a product by a company called Better Bee. They make a product called Better Comb, which is a synthetic, fully drawn comb that you can just cut out the toothpick into a frame. I'm not saying that that's a great or a bad product. I'm not advocating for them. I have real reservations about it from the honey show world, but from the beekeeping world, I think it's a fantastic product. It works really well if you need drawn comb instantly. It can work, but otherwise you're going to have to feed your bees a lot. Yes, sir.
So, what's the? We're brand new. We've got one hive, and they're doing pretty good. And I've put some what's it called? You put fondant at the top. So, what's the best way to feed them?
Well, there are parameters around that. If you want to feed your bees, the best way to feed them is to mix a weak sugar water syrup. And I think 2 parts of water to 1 part sugar works pretty good. It is very similar to flower nectar. Bees don't eat honey. They sure don't eat fondant. It's too thick. They have to add water back to it. All that honey they put up, they really have to bring water back to the hive or get condensed water from inside the hive to thin that back out so they can actually consume it. So if you need to feed your bees, certainly a 1-to-1 water to sugar by weight or a 2-to-1 water to sugar by weight, I think are the better ways to go if you need to feed them now. If you're putting up stores, trying to get them to put up stores for the winter, something thicker like 2-to-1 sugar to water or fondant, or there are all kinds of recipes for bee candy out there.
And someone said drip it from through the lid.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the best way to do it?
Well,
Or you just put sugar water nearby, like how?
It depends. There are lots of pros and cons to each way of doing this. All right. In general, there are 2 ways to feed bees. There's open feeding and there's closed feeding. Open feeding is where you're putting a feeder out on your porch in your yard, whether it's a jar of syrup or whether it's a kiddie pool or a 55-gallon drum, whatever, and you're just letting all the bees from wherever come feed there. And that is super fast, super efficient, not a lot of beekeeper time and energy in that. The downside of that is you're not just feeding your bees, you're feeding everybody else's bees, and anybody else's bees that come to the party with disease, then you've got a group assortment. That's what we think is the big problem with the bees going to California every year. Half the nation's bees end up in one valley, hanging out with each other for 6 weeks, and everybody comes home sick. The other way is closed feeding. There are lots of ways to do that. Most new beekeepers are familiar with Borden feeders. You take a quart jar and there's a little insert that goes in the front of your hive. You can use frame feeders that go inside your hive. You can use hive top feeders. If you don't want to use telescoping covers and inner covers, you can use what we call a migratory cover. You can just drill a hole in it and stick your feeder jar on top of that. The good parts about those things is they do control your access. You're not feeding everybody else's bees. Your resources are going into your bees. But they're more labor intensive and they require some specialized equipment to do. So it's really up to you of what you want to do. Depending on how many colonies I'm dealing with, generally make that decision. If I've got 24 colonies or more in a place, then I'm gonna go get a kiddie pool and a boat paddle and make some sugar syrup, throw some pine straw in it, so they don't float. Sometimes I might get a pool noodle and cut up into floating Cheerios. But if I'm just dealing with a handful of hives somewhere, I prefer to use a closed feeder. Now, to get back to the ups and downs, bees form their colonies in a sphere. We typically put them in a square box, so we're putting a round peg in a square hole. But they don't change the way they organize their colony in there. It's going to be spherical across those combs. And their natural tendency is to move upward. So if you've got the food above them, that's in its natural position for them where they want it. If you look at a frame of honey or a frame out of a beehive that's got brood in it, it's going to have, square rectangle like that. The brood's going to be at the bottom. There's going to be a ring of pollen above that and a ring of nectar above that. So they keep their food on top of their nursery. Now putting the honey or the syrup on top of them is a more natural thing for them. If it gets cold, they often won't move sideways or down to get food resources. So a top feeder is a lot better than say a Boardman feeder that fits in that front entrance, particularly if the weather's adverse. But there's a lot of options with that. But any of my other experienced master beekeepers want to add to that?
My favorite is Boardman is for water, and bees don't like clean water. Boardman, in my opinion, can encourage robbing, especially if you've got a weakish hive. Put sugar water in there, everybody in the neighborhood's gonna come over and steal it. But this time of year, because we're not getting a lot of rain, but we are, but once we hit the dearth and we quit having thunderstorms every afternoon, it's gonna dry out. Your bees are gonna find your neighbor's swimming pool. So Boardman water should be on everybody's bees right now. And
So what kind of, what?
just, honestly, a little bit of pool salt.
Okay.
Throw it in a 5-gallon bucket, just like a quarter cup in a 5-gallon bucket, makes salt water, because that's what bees like. If you've got a creek nearby, go down to the creek and get the gross water that you wouldn't drink. They don't like clean water. So they like the minerals like in the creek water, but that needs to, so Boardman should be for water, in my opinion, right now. And I like a bucket feeder on top because it's easy and I'm lazy.
A bucket feeder on top.
In a little bit, I have a PowerPoint for this. I'll
Okay.
show you what it looks like.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are lots of different ways to skin that cat.
We have a golf course pond about 150 yards, because that's how far the
I will
par
caution
five
you on
is.
your golf course.
So are we close enough?
Is your golf course gorgeous? Is it very well manicured?
No.
Because
Country land.
A lot of times, okay.
It's a goat track.
Yeah, but a lot of times your manicured golf courses is gonna be sprayed with herbicides, fungicides, and pesticides.
Okay.
So, and your herbicides and your fungicides do have an effect on your bees. Obviously pesticides.
And it'll go in the water because the water's low.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
So,
We need a
bird feeders, and I'm telling you, in my yard, I also have a disgusting kiddie pool, which probably is breeding mosquitoes. I know it's breeding mosquitoes, but I'm ignoring it. It's a disgusting kiddie pool that stays out in the weather all year round because it's gross, and the bees love it, and it's got all kinds of sticks and stuff in it because they don't swim.
not
But they have floaties, and they have little floaties for the bees because they're special. And if you put out clean water next to that and then watched it, they're gonna be in the gross mineral water.
Okay.
They're gonna bypass fresh water every time for pool water, either chlorine or salt. They prefer the mineral content, and when I say prefer, it's like steak versus soda crackers. They prefer it. That's the #1 complaint we get from non-beekeepers about beekeepers, is somebody's bees are in my pool, and my kid or my grandkid can't enjoy the pool because somebody's bees are over here. And she's absolutely right. If you can provide a water source close to your bees that has a little bit of that, and it's easy. You get, something like a little kiddie pool. If you want something more ornate, go to Home Depot or Lowe's and scratch that itch to your heart's content. I like to get They sell mineral, like rock crystals at the feed and seed stores for the hunters. You can buy it looks like just a big piece of quartz, but it's salt. You get one of those kiddie pools and throw one of them suckers in it and forget it. Just you want to have something like she said, the bees don't swim. I mentioned a minute ago, I get a pool noodle. I go to the Dollar Tree and buy one of those $1.25 pool noodles, and I get a steak knife and I start cutting little donuts. And I throw 50 of those in there so they have something to land on. You can't just cut it in logs because they roll. But if you cut them in flats, they float. But you don't have to be as redneck about a design. You can dress it up as nicely as you want. A lot of people use water features with pebbles, just something where the bees can land and get in and out without getting drowned.
Yeah. Wine corks for?
How much wine are you drinking to have enough corks?
You must see Pinterest doing that, okay?
She's only doing it 4 Okay, I'm gonna add something to this.
Yeah, Rodney, tell us.
One of the problems that I've had, I live up in the mountains, and we have a lot of deer. So I tried putting salt in the water, and what happens, deer come up and drink all the water. And they don't care if it's deer today or night or whatever, there's salt there and they're gonna go after it. What I have right now is about half a dozen frisbees sitting on the table on my deck. Put a double handful of glass marbles in there, and I go out there and refill those frisbees about twice a day. And that works real well. My wife finally got used to bees, so she's not afraid of them anymore. She'll go out and fill them up. So, but that makes a good thing. As well as the marbles there, the bees can get, if they fall in the water, they got a way to get out. And I have put salt, a little bit of salt in those. It works real well. Deer can't get to them. And but yes, you've got to supply water for your bees unless you got a creek right nearby.
Yes, sir.
We got, between us, we garden and we have, anybody who flowers, buy flats. The dirt, the potting soil, we just leave them full. The bees are on those more than anything. They act like a sponge. They like the dirt, sucking all that moisture out of the flats. We just leave them, wherever you leave your gardening tools and stuff.
These are survivors, and they're opportunists. They will find it if it's out there. It doesn't take a lot of effort on your part to get it out there. But it's up to you to do it. It's up to you to do it. You are a beekeeper, and you have a responsibility to. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
When do you put the entrance reducers on? This summer.
I don't use them at all unless I have somebody robbing. I don't use entrance reducer at all.
Not during summer, like so.
Me either.
Not unless if I have a hive that's being robbed, then I'll actually put a screen on the front of that hive that's open on the end. I use a 1/4-inch hardware cloth, number 8 hardware cloth. And so the bees flying in, coming out, know to go around the ends. The bees trying to rob, they get caught. They just can't get in the front of it. They're not, that little bee brain isn't big enough to figure out and go around the sides. But I don't put entrance reducers on at all unless I've got a robbing problem. Yes, ma'am.
So I do OA vapor, and I don't have the fancy, I have the wand that takes forever. How do you do that now when it's so hot and I have like 5 million bees on the outside of my hive?
That's one of those things that you have to be mindful of the situation. That, you may have to do it in the evening when they're more likely to be inside.
Yeah, I woke up at 6 the other day and my battery was dead.
Yeah.
I've been doing mine early in the morning.
What's that?
I've been doing mine early in the morning.
Yeah.
Once 10 o'clock rolls around, I'm done.
Yeah. What time do I wake up? Not 6 o'clock, so I was very upset that my battery was not charged.
Sorry, if your hive is in the sun and it's so hot, is there anything we can do to kind of help cool the hive down?
They don't need your help.
Doesn't it?
You got water source for them? You know what they'll do with their water? This is how cool bees are. They make their own air conditioning. They will bring water in, they will stand over the sills and fan it to cool the
Like
hive
an
down.
old-fashioned radiator.
They basically will have a swamp cooler in their hive.
Yep,
Okay.
as long as they have access to water, they can cool that hive. And just like during the winter, if it gets super cold, as long as they have access to sugar, I don't never heard of the temperature at which a beehive will absolutely be overcome by cold. They keep them in Alaska,
They keep their own cells.
they keep them, all throughout Canada, Russia, they got bees inside the,
I
well.
don't think they're on Antarctic yet, but I don't think anybody's on Antarctic.
They've got well inside the Arctic Circle,
Here and there, you
and
don't need
as
to-
long as they have sugar, as long as they have fuel, they will keep it as hot as they want to keep it, which is, they're gonna keep it in the 90-degree range inside that cluster. They're gonna keep it in the low 90s, because that's where they want it.
Good.
The bees are the only insect that can regulate their body temperature. And by doing that, in the winter, they'll sit there and keep the center of that cluster around 90 degrees. That's where the queen will be. During the summer, they'll bring water in, they'll evaporate it, and that's how they control the temperature of the hive. Plus, you'll see bees sitting out on the entrance, fanning. One of the biggest things you can do to help them is have spring bottom board. That allows them to circulate more air through the hive.
Any other questions about summer management?
Talk to me after the meeting.
Have I got 3 minutes to plug my?
You got 5 minutes to
Can I
play.
ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
So you talked about how much of the honey you lost
Yes.
during that 3-week time. So how could you have prevented that? I get him on every week. And so if I have a super, I'm lifting it and I know that it feels heavy. But I don't feed my bees if there's a super on. Is that correct?
That's typically correct, yes. Typically correct, unless that super is left on for the bees. You don't feed your bees on if you've got supers that you're going
That
to
you're gonna
pull.
consume, right.
Right. If you're gonna leave it there for them, that's fine, leave it there for them, you don't have to worry about that. The only thing I can think of off the top of my head that I could have done to stop that, there are several things, but there's several reasons that only one of them is a legitimate reply. The legitimate thing is gone on, I should have gone on and pulled them earlier and gone on it longer. If I hadn't waited, I could have gotten all that honey. Now, had I done that, I don't know that that hive would have survived, because I would have taken all 5 of them supers and pranced off like a fat pig, just as proud as I could be of myself with my 5 supers.